some real-life examples, good or bad, of karma. A few years ago, I was managing a UPS store in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where you'd see the same faces every day. Local business owners dropping off shipments, parents mailing care packages to their kids in college, and retirees sending gifts to their grandchildren. It was a mundane but predictable job, with the occasional odd request or unusual customer adding a bit of color to the routine. One crisp autumn morning, as I was organizing the counter and prepping for the day, an elderly man walked in. He must have been in his 80s, with a stooped posture and a weathered face that suggested a lifetime of stories. There was something immediately odd about his demeanor. His eyes darted around nervously, and his hands trembled as he clutched a small, cream-colored envelope. His clothes were neat but worn, like he had dressed in his Sunday best for a simple errand. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" I greeted him with my usual customer service cheerfulness, but his response was far from ordinary. I need to send this," he stammered, holding up the envelope. His voice was shaky, and he seemed almost afraid to meet my gaze. "But I need it to go inside a box. Can you do that?" Now we received all sorts of strange requests at the UPS store, but this one was particularly unusual. The envelope was clearly meant for mailing on its own. It felt like there was only paper inside, nothing that would typically require extra protection. Plus, putting it in a box would significantly increase the shipping cost, something I was sure he was aware of. "Sure, we can do that," I replied, trying to keep my tone light and reassuring. "Where's it going?" He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind and leave. Then he whispered a name. A woman's name, it sounded like, and then quickly corrected himself with a completely different name. The whole interaction was peculiar, and it set off alarm bells in my head. "Are you sure you want to ship it in a box? It'll cost about $25 more," I informed him gently, hoping to get a better understanding of why he wanted such an expensive option for what seemed like a simple letter. Yes, it has to be in a box," he insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes pleaded with me not to ask any more questions. I nodded and went about the task, choosing a small box and carefully placing the envelope inside. As I worked, I couldn't help but notice the man's increasing anxiety. He kept glancing towards the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. His hands fidgeted with the edges of his coat, and a bead of sweat trickled down his temple despite the cool temperature. "Do you need any insurance or tracking on this?" I asked, hoping to ease his obvious distress with some routine options. No, just send it as is," he replied quickly. "I just need it to get there, that's all." I finalized the transaction, gave him his receipt, and watched as he hurried out the door, his hunched figure disappearing into the morning sunlight. The encounter left me unsettled, and I found myself replaying it in my mind throughout the day. What was in that envelope that had made the old man so anxious? Why the insistence on the box? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the image of the elderly man and his strange request. Every time the door chimed, I half expected to see him walk in again, maybe with another peculiar parcel, but he didn't return. And life at the UPS store went back to its regular rhythm. It was a few months later when the mystery of the envelope resurfaced in the most unexpected way. One evening, as I was closing up the store, a young woman entered. She looked to be in her late 20s, with a determined expression that contrasted sharply with the elderly man's nervous demeanor. "Excuse me, are you the manager?" she asked, her voice steady and purposeful. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" I replied, curious about her business at such a late hour. She pulled out a small photo from her purse and showed it to me. It was a picture of the old man who had come in months before. "This is my grandfather," she explained. "He sent a package from here a while back, and I need to know where it went." Her request caught me off guard. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out customer information without their permission," I said, adhering to company policy. "I understand," she said, her tone softening slightly, "but it's really important. You see, my grandfather passed away recently, and he left a note saying that he sent something very valuable through this store. We've been trying to piece together his last days, and this might be a crucial part of the puzzle." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The elderly man's anxious face flashed before my eyes, and I felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman standing in front of me. She looked desperate, clinging to any thread that might unravel the mystery of her grandfather's last actions. "Let me see what I can do," I said finally, bending the rules just a little. "Do you have any details about the shipment?" She handed me a crumpled receipt, the same one I had given her grandfather that day. I took it, and entered the tracking number into the system. As the details popped up on the screen, I saw that the package had been delivered to an address in a neighboring state signed for by someone named Elaine Harper. Elaine Harper, the young woman repeated, scribbling the name into a note. Do you have any idea who that is? I shook my head. I'm sorry, I don't, but that's where the package was delivered. Thank you, she said, her voice a mix of gratitude and frustration. This helps more than you know. As she left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unfinished business. The mystery of the envelope, the old man's anxiety, and now his granddaughter's quest to uncover the truth. It all felt like a story that was far from over, and little did I know, my role in it was just beginning. A few days later, the young woman returned, looking even more determined than before. I found Elaine Harper, she announced as she walked up to the counter. She was an old friend of my grandfather's. They lost touch years ago, but apparently she's been living in a care home nearby. She said the envelope contained some old letters and photos, things from their past. That's good to hear, I replied, genuinely relieved that the mystery was starting to unravel. Did she say anything about why he was so anxious to send it? She nodded. Apparently, my grandfather and Elaine were in love a long time ago, before he met my gran. They were separated by circumstances, and he always regretted not finding her again. Those letters and photos were his way of reconnecting with her, even if it was just through memories. Her words left me speechless. The story was so bittersweet, a tale of lost love and final chances. It made sense now why the old man had been so nervous. He was sending a piece of his heart, a part of his past that he could never reclaim but desperately wanted to share. Thank you for helping me, she said softly. I think it brought him some peace, knowing she would have those memories. The day after the young woman left, my thoughts kept drifting back to the elderly man and his anxious visit. As I was organizing some shipping supplies in the back, I noticed a small security flaw. The envelope he had handed me wasn't sealed. My curiosity gnawed at me. I knew it was against policy and basic decency to look inside, but something about the entire situation felt off. The man's jittery behavior, the insistence on using a box for a simple envelope, it just didn't add up. I rationalized that I was doing this out of concern, that maybe there was something dangerous or illegal inside. With a cautious glance around to make sure no one was watching, I carefully opened the envelope. My heart pounded as I peeked inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled. There must have been close to $9,000 in there. No one ships cash, especially not that much. The whole scenario screamed scam to me. Alarmed, I immediately sealed the envelope back up and placed it in the box. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my shaking hands as I picked up the phone and dialed the local police station. Hi, this is Steve from the UPS store on Maple Street. I've got a situation here that seems really suspicious, I began, explaining the details of the elderly man, the unsealed envelope, and the cash. I told them about my concerns, how everything about the interaction had felt wrong. The officer on the other end took my information seriously. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll need the contact information of the sender and any details about the recipient address. We'll handle it from here. Relieved that I wasn't overreacting, I provided them with everything they needed and hung up. The cops assured me they would contact the old man to verify the story and make sure he wasn't being taken advantage of. It felt good, knowing that I might be preventing someone from losing their hard-earned money. Later that afternoon, the police called back. It turned out my hunch was correct. The elderly man had indeed been the target of a cruel scam. Someone had phoned him, claiming to be from a hospital, saying that his grandson had been in a terrible accident and needed immediate surgery. They told him the hospital wouldn't perform the surgery without an upfront payment of $9,000. Desperate and panicked, the poor man had withdrawn his life savings and headed to my store to send the money. The cops were able to get in touch with the old man and verify that his grandson was, in fact, safe and sound, with no hospital visit at all. They informed him about the scam and reassured him that his money was safe, thanks to the intervention at the UPS store. With the address provided, the police coordinated with law enforcement in the recipient city. They set up a sting operation and managed to arrest the scammer when he arrived to collect the money. It was a small victory in the ongoing battle against fraud, but it felt significant. We had saved a vulnerable elderly man from losing his life savings, and a scammer was off the streets. A few days later, the elderly man returned to the store. His demeanor was entirely different, calm, composed, and visibly relieved. He walked up to the counter and took my hand in both of his. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You saved me. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost that money. It's all I have left." I felt a lump form in my throat as I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'm just glad we could help, sir. That's what we're here for." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. "This is for you," he said, pressing it into my hand. "I know it's not much, but it's a token of my gratitude." I tried to refuse, but he was insistent. "Please take it. You've done more for me than you know." I accepted the tip, not for the money itself, but for what it represented, a heartfelt thank you from a man who had nearly lost everything. It was a reminder of why I did this job, why I took pride in helping others, even in small, seemingly insignificant ways. The incident left a lasting impression. It was a powerful reminder of the vulnerability of the elderly and the importance of vigilance in our everyday interactions. Scams like these prey on fear and panic, exploiting the most compassionate and trusting among us. While we can't prevent every scam, small acts of awareness and intervention can make a huge difference. As I watched the old man leave the store, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. In a world where deceit and dishonesty often go unchecked, it was a small but meaningful victory. It reinforced my belief in doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient or risky. That day, I wasn't just a UPS store manager. I was a protector of sorts, someone who had helped safeguard a piece of someone's life. The following weeks brought a renewed sense of purpose to my job. Each time a customer walked in, I greeted them with a genuine smile, reminded of the impact a little vigilance and kindness can have. And though the old man never returned, his story stayed, a testament to the difference we can make in each other's lives, one small act at a time. The day after the old man came to thank me, the universe decided to deliver a bizarre twist of karma. I was going through the daily pile of packages when I noticed an RTS label on one of them, "Return to sender," either because the recipient refused the delivery or wasn't home to accept it. It was a fairly common occurrence, but something about this particular package caught my eye. It was a medium-sized box wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address and only a disconnected phone number for the sender. Curiosity piqued. I decided to open it up. My intentions were purely practical. I needed to find some clue about who sent it so I could try to get in touch with. Maybe there was a note or an invoice inside that could give us more information. As I sliced through the tape and pried open the flaps, a familiar, pungent smell wafted out, hitting me square in the face. "Is that—" I mumbled to myself, reaching inside. My fingers brushed against a tightly sealed plastic bag, and when I pulled it out, there was no mistaking what I was holding. A pound of marijuana, packed and ready for distribution. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked around to make sure no one had seen me. The store was empty, thankfully, and I took a moment to process what I had just discovered. This wasn't just a minor contraband item. It was a substantial amount, and I knew it could land someone in serious trouble. My first instinct was to call the police again, just like with the old man's envelope, but something made me pause. This was different. There was no immediate victim I could identify, and frankly, dealing with the authorities over this wasn't something I relished. I weighed my options carefully. If I turned it in, there would be questions. Lots of. I'd have to explain why I opened the package in the first place, and while I was confident in my reasons, it still felt like walking a fine line. On the other hand, keeping it felt equally risky, but there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the irony of the situation, a sort of cosmic balance for the good deed I'd done just a day before. I decided to take a gamble. Carefully, I resealed the package and tucked it away in a corner of the back room, behind some boxes of shipping supplies. For the next few hours, I went about my day with a heightened sense of awareness, half expecting someone to burst through the doors demanding their weed back. But nothing happened. The day ended uneventfully, and I locked up the store, the weight of my secret following me home. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the package's contents occupied my thoughts. It wasn't just the potential legal trouble that made me uneasy, it was the sheer absurdity of it all. But as the days passed, my initial anxiety began to fade, replaced by a sort of cautious curiosity. I had a pound of weed sitting in the back room of my store, and no one seemed to care. Winter came early that year, bringing with it bitter cold and long, dark evenings. The package stayed hidden, its existence a strange, comforting secret. One particularly frigid evening, after a long day at work, I found myself staring at the corner where I'd hidden the package. The allure of not having to pay for weed for the rest of the winter was too strong to resist. I took the package home that night, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. I knew the risks, but the prospect of free weed was too tempting to ignore. I carefully portioned it out, keeping my stash discreet and manageable. It felt surreal, like I was living in some twisted version of a sitcom where the protagonist stumbles into a bizarre wind. For the next few months, my winter evenings were a little warmer, a little more relaxed. I didn't have to worry about finding or buying weed. I had more than enough to last me through the season. Each time I lit up, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity. The universe had a strange sense of humor, balancing out my good deed with an unexpected gift. But as the winter wore on, I couldn't completely shake the feeling of unease. What if someone came looking? What if the cops somehow traced it back to me? I knew I was playing a risky game, and while I enjoyed the temporary boon, I also knew it couldn't last forever. Spring eventually arrived, and with it a renewed sense of clarity. I had used up most of the weed by then, and the anxiety of getting caught had lessened. But I also realized I had been incredibly lucky. Not everyone who stumbled upon a pound of weed would come out unscathed. One day, as I was cleaning out the back room, I found the empty package that had caused so much turmoil. I decided it was time to get rid of it, to close this bizarre chapter of my life. I took it home and burned it in my fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the last traces of my winter secret. The experience left me with a renewed sense of caution and appreciation for the unpredictable nature of life. I continued to manage the UPS store, but I kept a sharper eye out for unusual packages and strange customers. The elderly man's gratitude and the bizarre twist of fate that followed served as a reminder that life has a way of balancing itself out, often in the most unexpected ways. And while I didn't regret my actions, I knew better than to tempt fate again. The universe had given me a gift, but it also taught me a lesson. Sometimes, doing the right thing can lead to unforeseen rewards, but it's also important to recognize when you've been given a second chance and to tread carefully from there on out.